culture, things that you've been exposed to. All those things, when you add them together, create your big story. Okay? But I'm not just talking about that big story, because everybody say that's deep. That's deep. Sometimes it's way too deep for what you want to accomplish. Or you might feel like, hey, I'm not there yet at being able to put all the pieces together of my big story. You don't have to be to still be an effective storyteller. Because the other thing I'm mentioning is the power of a single story, which is a specific event or experience, right? So what I started with was big story. But I can communicate that same idea about owning your story and being who you are authentically in a single story. Let's try it. Big story was 2 to 25, right? All these different factors. We're talking about family history and culture and all these things, right? I'm going to tell you a single story that's going to communicate the same idea, okay? So, I know that by the way you're looking at me, you can tell that I'm an incredible athlete. I know, I just give off those vibes, right? And you guessed it, I played basketball. And I was so incredibly skilled at basketball. Just listen, I really stopped playing just out of humility because I didn't want to change the game that bad and have people feel bad about themselves. I was so good that at the end of the year, when it came time for the basketball conference, when I was playing back in middle school, where they give you all the awards, I walked away with a very special trophy. Y'all don't know nothing about that MIP. Right, yeah, that's the real. Everybody's talking about the MVP. I got the trophy on the bottom of it. I still have it in my garage to this day, and it says Princeton Parker MIP, Most Improved Player. Yeah, that's how impactful my basketball game was. I remember going to play, and as you can already tell, I was pretty bad. And one time I walked up, and after my coach watching me for about 4 or 5 games, I can tell you what he was thinking. He was thinking, poor kid. How can I continue to coach him and not absolutely crush his feelings? So he pulled me aside one day, and I had felt bad about not being good. Little kid, like, number one, again, I wanted to be cool, right? The preacher thing, listen, I wanted to be cool. Second of all, it's basketball. I'm a little black kid. I'm supposed to be good at this. And my coach pulled me aside and he said, hey, Princeton, I'm not going to have you be one of the starters today, but here's where I need you. He said, before we go out to the court, I'm going to get every person connected to our team in a room, and I need you to inspire them. Because nobody gets across to people like you. And I was like, okay. And it taught me how to own my difference. You get that? That's totally different than the story I opened with, right? But they communicate the same message. It can be just as impactful for you to understand how to come across, own your difference, how to be authentic. So I'm talking about those two, and I'm teaching you how to do both. How do you do your big story, and how do you tell a single story, okay? Now, situations that call for us to tell our story, you're going to need this. This is not just for my fellow oratory competitors. There'll be some stuff in there for them. Sometimes we think about public speaking and storytelling. If I'm involved in math and science, what do I need this for? No, listen. Storytellers can convince people to engage in things they don't understand. You know who was amazing at this? Steve Jobs. If you ever go back and watch what was called the WWDC, the Worldwide Developers Conference, if you were particularly in math and science looking for who did this very well, it was Steve Jobs. He would come to these conferences where they were talking about stuff that I don't understand at all, like Java and coding and new programs. But he was such a good storyteller that he could make you think you understood stuff you ain't never went to school for. And all of us are still buying products to this day, not just because of his innovation, but because of his real intense storytelling and how he navigated that ability. So you need this: college applications, job interviews, press interviews, social media, business pitches. For all of my folks who are singers and artists, the world does not care how talented you are. It needs to know how much of your story you bring to your art. This is why people like Adele mean so much to us, right? I would argue, don't fight me, that there might be some stronger vocalists, but there is something about when Adele steps out, somewhere We are more concerned, write this down. People are more concerned, in our time specifically, with authenticity than we are talent. There are some people who you think are really cool, but you don't feel connected to them because you don't know their story. We are living in a time now where if you were trying to pitch to consumers, if you were trying to build a brand, you need to know that oftentimes people are more concerned about authenticity than talent. So this applies to your social media, right? You've been posting all these videos of how amazing you are, right? And you sing it, and we're like, oh, you better sing. But who are you? And have I had an opportunity to connect with that, right? You need this for elevated speakers, meetings, leadership roles, friendship conversations, dating, the whole nine. You need to know how to tell your story. I was thinking about a great analogy for this because many of us, the reason why I called it Own Your Story and Speak Up, is because some of us know our story or a story, but we're like this shopping cart. I was adulting, at Food for Less, getting my own groceries, and I remember I had loaded the cart up and I saw this sign that was very fascinating to me. It said that the cart was somehow programmed and or trained that if you get it to a point that's outside the limits of where it's supposed to be in that parking lot, that you can try to push that if you want to, but it's going to literally stop at that marker. Many of us with our stories are like that shopping cart. We're full of content, full of things that could secure us jobs, opportunities, relationships, etc. But just like that shopping cart, we get to a point and we stop. So, question for you all, I want some examples. What are some things that have made you do that hard stop? I have a story, I know who I am, I'm not going to tell it. Yes?
Getting told no.
Getting told no. How many other people have identified with that? Where you're like, I'm not going to share my story because it might be a no on the other end. Yes?
Having it not be as authentic as you want it to be.
Very interesting, right? Where you're also doing this dance between like, what if I don't do my story justice, right? What if I don't tell it in a way that's captivating? You'll leave here knowing how to do that. Yes?
Comparing myself to others and being demotivated.
Absolutely, like I did on that panel. You're looking down at the 4 other stories you just heard, like, whoo, child, there's no room for me. Some other barriers. What are those lines in the back? Yes?
Fear of judgment.
Fear of judgment. How will people perceive my story, right? I've lived this, but how will people view it? I see a hand right there. Is that you? Yes?
If your story has like a hard setback that you have to recover from it.
Absolutely. How many of us struggle with that? What if it's a story still in progress? Right? Somebody said that's deep. If it's a story still in progress, right? I don't yet know how this story ends. Now, this is a pause because I think a lot of us may be struggling with that. Remember, you don't always have to go big story. You can work through a single story. So for example, I'm going to use one. Let's just say I grew up in a certain area and there were a lot of challenges that came with that. Challenges like poverty, I was exposed to violence at an early age, etc. I might still live in that neighborhood, so I might not have that whole in the story, this is where I am, what I'm doing now. But what I can tell is a single story about one event that might have happened over that period of time and how that has impacted me. You can still get the same thing across, okay? The reason why we don't share our stories is because there are quite a few things we are all asking. There's some questions in our mind that we are all asking. The first question that I know is in your head because it's been in mine is my story really that special? Hands up if you've ever felt like that. In all of our minds, we're wondering, is my story really even that special? In your notes, here's the answer. Your jest is someone else's finally. Your jest is someone else's finally. The reason why you don't think your story is that valuable is because you've lived it. You've lived with yourself for now 14, 16, 17, 18 years. And so life is just normal for you. And so you go, oh, I just write. Or I'm just from this, or my parents have just, etc. But your jest is someone else's finally. Someone else is going to hear that and go, I've been waiting for somebody who was from Chicago and also interested in flag. I've been waiting for someone who struggled with that and was able to make this out of it. Somebody else is going to go, oh, I've been waiting to hear because all the other examples that I have of this were men. And I've been waiting for someone who owned their femininity and brought that experience to this, right? You got the same story, but there's something unique about your context that's going to allow somebody to feel like, finally somebody gets me. Other question we're asking is, can anyone really benefit from my story? Can anyone really benefit? Like, anybody really learn something? I mean, I wasn't preaching it before, so someone else. This is going to be so important for when you are going into the workplace. The last question all of us are asking. We're asking this question. Will my story make me stand out too much? How many folks have ever struggled with that? Right? It goes back to that perception piece. I don't know how you're going to feel about me if I bring the fullness of my story or my single story to this experience. The answer to that question is, it's not about how they will perceive your story. It's about how you present your story. You don't control the perception. You do control the presentation. Right? Your dream requires you to bring your full authentic self. You don't get an option. Your dream requires it. Why? Because your story is your superpower. Everybody say that. My story is my superpower. All right? Now, as we go into this, you have to fix the way you see it so you can work on how you tell it. You have to fix the way you see it before you can fix the way you tell it. I'm going to help you tell it right now. But you have to see it as a superpower. You have to see it as special. You have to see it as being something that is going to get you there. Okay? I'm handing out some documents so that I can teach you this. Because now we got to go on like, hey, appreciate you guys. Feel all fluffy inside. But now, how do I do this, okay? These documents are yours to keep. They are yours to manipulate. You're going to get 2 of them, okay? So if you haven't got all the 2, we're coming around. I'm going to take the next 15 minutes of our time to explain these models, and then I'm going to do some live coaching. We'll have some fun, okay? Y'all having a good time so far? Good. Good. Okay. So we hand those out. You got 2.
Who else is this for?
You got 2.
This is for the kids.
Miss Pam, they can have some because I printed out enough.
Okay.
I have enough.
But I'm saying it's for the kids, it's not for the parents.
What he's saying is
Make
let
sure those
everybody
go around,
have
okay?
them.
Now,
Yes, he said let everybody have
everybody
some.
sit with me here. Here we go. Your story does
No, he
3
said
things.
everyone.
Everybody say that? Your story does
Do you
3
want
things.
everyone to have one, or you want the kids to have?
Everyone can have one.
Okay.
There we go.
So use yours. I'm sorry.
Hear me clearly.
I'll make sure you guys have it.
Your story does these 3 things. When you're applying for a job, when you're asking for someone to sponsor your dream, etc. Your story explains you. Right? There are going to be certain parts of you that when you share your story, you're like, oh, I get why you do that. I get why you have that talent. I get why you see the world that way. Your story also connects you. You feel connected to someone, whether they be on your team, whether they be around you, whatever that might be. Through your story. And last but not least, your story qualifies. It explains why someone should let you do what you do, right? My story proves that I have experience and or expertise in this area, which is why you should listen to me. This is why we did that connection activity to start, right? It wasn't about what side you found yourself on. It was about those little mini conversations that got started around the way. What we were doing was a very small version of storytelling, right? When we did that whole grits thing, I'm like, right? And you come over here and it was like, no, it's South Pepper because my mama made it that way. Oh, where are you from? Well, I'm from, right? That's the beginning workings of storytelling and connection. Same thing for why we started this with where are you from? Because the idea is that I can come up and look, oh, Los Angeles, California. That's where I'm from. It's the beginning workings of connections. That's what you do. All right, so last question is how do I tell it? We use the speak model. All right. I am going to talk you through this, and I want you to fill it out on your sheet as we move through it. I'm going to talk you through this. It is called the speak model. It is a model that I came up with to help you